She no longer performs to be seen because she has faced the hollowness that once made her crave the spotlight. She has met the ghost of the girl who thought being chosen meant being worthy, and she has buried her with grace. Carl Jung said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This woman no longer calls it fate when people overlook her, no longer sees rejection as punishment, no longer needs to sparkle for scraps. She has dismantled the reflex to audition for love, to perform for proximity, to edit herself down into a version that fits someone else's fantasy. What remains now is presence, rooted and unbothered, a quiet force that no longer demands approval, but simply radiates truth. She has peeled back every role she used to play, every costume she wore to feel accepted, and now stands as herself, whole and uncostumed. There is no need to exaggerate, to posture, to win the room. Her dignity no longer hangs in the balance of someone else's reaction. This is what Jung called individuation, the slow integration of all that was once scattered. She no longer seeks validation because she has validated herself in the silence, in the solitude, in the sacred moments where no one was watching, and yet she showed up anyway. Her value is not a performance, it is a presence. It cannot be marketed, cannot be manipulated, cannot be lost when someone stops clapping. She used to think she had to explain herself to be understood, to be palatable, to be digestible, but now she lets the fullness of who she is speak for itself. She knows now that truth does not always win popularity, but it always wins peace. The approval she used to chase came with a cost: exhaustion, self-erasure, dependence, and now she pays that cost no more. The applause she used to crave feels shallow next to the deep stillness she carries. Jung taught that the path to wholeness is not found in becoming good, but in becoming real, and that's exactly what she's done. She has retrieved her essence from the personas she once wore like armor. She has learned to sit with the discomfort of not being liked and found that it does not kill her, it frees her. Now she no longer confuses attention for intimacy. She no longer reaches for noise when silence holds the answers. She no longer bends to soothe someone else's discomfort with her boundaries, her standards, or her becoming. She belongs to herself now. She walks into rooms without scanning for approval. She speaks without rehearsing. She rests without guilt. She takes up space without apology. She does not need to be liked to be powerful. She does not need to be understood to be real. What she knows is enough. What she is enough. And that energy, unperformed and unapologetic, is magnetic in a way performance never was. In a world conditioned to chaos and distraction, her calm is revolutionary. In a culture addicted to validation, her self-sourced worth is a kind of rebellion. She is not the loudest in the room, but people notice when she enters. She is not the most decorated, but her energy lingers. She mirrors calm. That poise becomes quietly addictive in a world conditioned to chaos. And without chasing a single thing, she draws everything aligned to her frequency. That is the power of no longer performing to be seen. She faced her shadow without flinching because somewhere along the way she realized the pieces of herself she had spent years exiling were not enemies but invitations. Carl Jung taught that the shadow is everything we refuse to acknowledge within ourselves, and that true wholeness only comes from integrating, not denying. So she stopped denying. She sat down with the parts of her that had made her uncomfortable in mirrors and relationships and silence. She looked into the eyes of her envy and did not judge it, only asked what it needed. She listened to the voice of her insecurity and traced its echo back to wounds never named. She held the trembling shape of her guilt and let it speak before she released it. She admitted her longing instead of masking it behind busyness or bravado. She stopped trying to be good and started trying to be whole. In doing so, she claimed a kind of internal authority no performance could grant. She no longer fears being misunderstood because she no longer misunderstands herself. There is a strange, almost sacred calm in someone who has walked through their own darkness and chosen to stay. She no longer looks for villains in other people because she has met the ones within her and made peace. That is why she does not gossip, does not compete, does not grasp. That is why she can say no with grace and walk away with peace. Her wholeness is not performative, it is embodied. She is not perfect and does not pretend to be. She is not above pain and does not pretend to heal in linear lines. But she is real, she is integrated, she is awake, and that makes her undeniable. Jung said the gold is in the shadow and she has found it. The very parts she thought disqualified her are now the sources of her compassion, her clarity, her calm. She can sit with someone else's grief without trying to fix it. She can hold space for rage without moralizing it. She can speak hard truths without weaponizing them. She is not afraid of human messiness because she no longer denies her own. That is why people feel safe around her. That is why her presence lingers. That is why her silence says more than most people's noise. She has nothing to prove because she has nothing to hide. She no longer externalizes the war within her. She no longer projects her pain onto others. She owns her story, even the pages written in shadows. That ownership becomes magnetism, that integration becomes intuition, that depth becomes the reason people find themselves telling her the truth without knowing why. Because she does not flinch at her own reflection, others feel invited to look honestly at theirs. She is not a mirror for ego, she is a mirror for essence. And that reflection, rare and unwavering, is unforgettable. She knows now that to love herself is to know herself, and to know herself is to claim all that she is. The light, the dark, the longing, the anger, the ache, nothing left behind. No masks, no facades, only truth. That is the energy of someone who faced her shadow and did not run. That is the quiet wholeness that makes others question what they are still afraid to see. That is why she cannot be ignored. That is why she does not chase. That is why she draws in what is real. Because she is real. Because she is whole. Because she faced her shadow without flinching. She withdraws to reconnect, not to disappear, because Jung taught that solitude is the incubator of individuation, and that without it, the self remains scattered across the demands and expectations of others. She has learned to recognize the subtle difference between loneliness and aloneness, between escape and return. Her silence is not passive and her absence is not punishment. It is the conscious pulling back of her energy so that it can realign, recalibrate, and re-enter the world on her terms. Years ago, she mistook availability for love and accessibility for worth. She said yes to too much, smiled through exhaustion, nodded when she wanted to scream. But now, she chooses sacred withdrawal over chronic performance. She knows that the psyche, like the tide, needs to ebb so that it can flood again with clarity and intention. Carl Jung believed the soul speaks most clearly in stillness, and she listens. She listens when her nervous system asks for quiet. She listens when her spirit pulls her inward. She does not abandon relationships. She simply refuses to abandon herself in them. While others broadcast their presence in hopes of being seen, she slips out of view without explanation and returns more whole, more clear, more luminous. Her solitude is not a wound, but a well, and she draws from it, not to prove anything, but to protect everything. This is why her presence is so potent. This is why she doesn't need to chase attention, because when she does show up, she is fully there, undistracted, undivided, unthirsty. She has been filled from within. She does not withdraw to create mystery. She withdraws because that is where her clarity lives. Jung said that knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of others, and she cannot hold space for anyone if she has not first held it for herself. So she disappears from the noise, not to be missed but to be remembered, to gather the pieces of herself she gave away too quickly, to remember her rhythm, her reason, her truth. And when she re-enters the room, it is with an energy that cannot be faked, an energy that mirrors calm. That poise becomes quietly addictive in a world conditioned to chaos. People feel it. They pause. They wonder what she carries. They do not realize it is her silence, her refusal to be everywhere, her mastery of being exactly where she is. She has made peace with the fact that she will be misunderstood. She no longer over-explains her exits. She does not justify her silence. She does not fear the gaps in communication, because she has learned that what is real will remain and what is aligned will understand. That is why she is not desperate to be included. That is why she doesn't rush to respond. Her worth is not tethered to visibility. Her soul is not calibrated to performance. She is not withdrawing from the world. She is returning to herself, again and again, as often as it takes, until her yes is clean, until her presence is true, until her energy is sovereign. That is her habit. That is her discipline. That is her power. She withdraws not to disappear but to come home, and that coming home, witnessed or not, is what makes her undeniable. She no longer competes for the male gaze because she has awakened to the truth that the authentic self can never be born through comparison, only through integration. Jung taught that wholeness does not come from being admired, it comes from reconciling the fragmented aspects of the psyche, and she has done just that. She has walked through the valley of mirrors where femininity was once a currency to be traded for belonging and affection. She remembers the years she spent polishing herself into an image she thought would finally be loved enough. She wore charm like armor, approval like oxygen, But that was before she knew that what the male gaze desires is rarely what the soul requires. That was before she realized that performing womanhood for consumption is not the same as embodying womanhood from the inside out. Her desire now is not to be selected but to be sovereign, not to be watched but to be witnessed. And this changes everything. She no longer scans the room for competition. She no longer adjusts her voice to be softer or her opinions to be sweeter. She does not use her beauty as leverage. She does not audition with her silence. Jung's work reminds us that the persona is only one mask among many, and she has stopped confusing the mask with her identity. She knows that the animus within her is not a threat to her femininity, but a necessary bridge to her inner authority. So she has welcomed her inner masculine not as an enemy, but as an ally. And now her energy feels whole rather than split between seeking and suppressing. She does not weaponize her appearance, and she does not shrink from her power. She no longer enters a space wondering if she is the prettiest or the youngest or the most wanted. She enters wondering if she is the most real, if she is honest, if she is rooted, if she is in alignment with the woman she meets in the mirror. And that shift is not loud. It does not need to be. It moves beneath the surface like a quiet certainty that reorders the energy around her. Women notice it and feel disoriented. Men notice it and feel drawn but unsure why. It is the absence of hunger. It is the presence of essence. Her self-worth no longer fluctuates based on glances or compliments. She has retired from the exhausting loop of earning male attention just to momentarily feel safe. She has realized that nothing you have to chase will ever be a home, that being the most admired woman in the room is hollow if it costs you intimacy with yourself. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and she has made that her mission. Not to be desired, but to be whole. Not to be chased, but to be complete. And this is what makes her magnetic. This is what makes her unforgettable. Not her lashes or her laugh or her walk across the room, but her refusal to perform, her peace with being overlooked if it means being true, her commitment to authenticity even if it costs her applause. That is the woman you cannot replace. That is the woman who no longer competes because she already owns herself completely. That is the woman whose calm mirrors calm. That poise becomes quietly addictive in a world conditioned to chaos. She owns the parts that once made her feel too much because she has come to understand that those very parts were never flaws, but fragments of her power waiting to be honored. Carl Jung taught that integration is the path to wholeness, and she has walked that path by turning toward every version of herself she once tried to quiet, shrink, or explain away. There was a time when her depth felt like a burden, when her questions made others uncomfortable, when her emotions were labeled excessive and her silence misread as cold. There was a time when she softened her ambition so she would not outshine, dulled her intellect so she would not intimidate, and narrowed her range to fit into a space too small for her becoming. But that time has passed. Now she no longer flinches when someone calls her intense. She does not rush to soften her edges or defend her solitude. She does not apologize for the way her energy fills a room without needing permission. She knows that intensity is not a danger when it is anchored in truth. She knows that emotion is not weakness when it is metabolized into wisdom. She knows that ambition is not abandonment of the feminine but an expression of the divine will to create, to grow, to become, and she no longer hides it. She does not edit her joy or her sorrow. She does not dilute her dreams or her discernment. She does not mute her instincts or ask for reassurance when her intuition speaks clearly. Jung said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and she has done that. Not perfectly, but fully. She has sat with the parts of herself that once made her feel undesirable or unlovable, and she has chosen them as her own. That self-choosing changed her posture. She no longer asks if she is too much. She no longer wonders if she needs to be smaller to be worthy. She knows she is not too much for the right people and not enough for the wrong ones, and that knowing makes her quietly powerful. She walks into rooms no longer hoping to be accepted. She brings acceptance with her. She speaks with a calm that does not need to convince. She listens with a stillness that does not seek approval. She moves through the world without needing to be understood to feel legitimate. Her approval is internal now, her center is home, and this self-containment is not detachment, it is devotion to the truth of who she is, in all her layers, her softness and her fire, her hunger and her restraint, her knowing and her questioning. She is not afraid of contradiction because she understands that the soul is vast and the psyche is layered, and integration is not about choosing sides but embracing the whole. This woman is not a puzzle to be solved. She is a force that harmonizes complexity. That is what makes her undeniable, not because she is perfect, not because she is easy, but because she is whole. Her poise does not scream, it does not seek, it simply is. And in a world that demands constant performance, her being becomes a kind of rebellion. She's comfortable being misunderstood because she has learned the difference between being seen and being validated, between being liked and being real. Carl Jung wrote that loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important. And this woman has stopped bleeding energy trying to translate her soul to people who were never meant to hear it. She no longer pauses her growth to make others comfortable. She no longer lowers her voice to be palatable or trims her boundaries to be accepted. Instead, she has accepted the sacredness of being unknown by the masses and deeply known by herself. It is not arrogance that steadies her, it is self-possession. It is the peace that arrives when your sense of worth is no longer held hostage by anyone's ability to comprehend you. She does not explain her silence. She does not soften her no. She does not offer disclaimers for the life she's building simply because it confuses those still operating from wounded patterns. And this lack of justification is not cruelty, it is clarity, because she knows her path is not for everyone. She knows that not every person will have the range to hold what she carries. Jung understood that individuation requires a confrontation with the collective, and this woman has faced that tension. She has learned to let go of approval in favor of truth. She has learned to welcome misunderstanding as a sign that she is walking in alignment with something deeper than consensus. In a world addicted to constant explanation and performance, she becomes unshakable, not because everyone gets her, but because she no longer needs them to. Her energy is not loud, but it is certain. It is not always understood, but it is always felt, and that feeling lingers. It challenges, it humbles, it inspires. Because it is rare, she does not rush to clarify who she is. She lets her life speak. She lets her choices teach. She lets her stillness reveal more than 1,000 explanations ever could. And in doing so, she becomes a mirror, not for ego, but for essence. She reflects back to others the places within themselves they have yet to claim, and sometimes that reflection is too sharp, too honest, too real, so they project, they misunderstand, they twist her intentions to fit their comfort, but she does not chase their clarity, she does not bargain with her peace. She knows the cost of being understood by everyone is often the betrayal of self, and that is a price she will never pay again. Jung taught that wholeness is not about goodness, it is about integration, and she has integrated enough shadow to know that her worth is not negotiable, that her boundaries are not cruel, that her quiet is not empty. So she walks without apology, she speaks without fear, she withdraws without guilt, she builds without asking for permission, she leads without needing to be crowned, and in that quiet self-ownership, she becomes something rare, not a brand, not a blueprint, a presence, a vibration, a truth. And truth does not beg to be understood, it just is. She doesn't confuse chemistry with compatibility because she has learned to listen beneath the thrill, beneath the butterflies, beneath the adrenaline rush that once made her feel chosen when really it just mirrored her unhealed places. Carl Jung taught that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives and we will call it fate. She no longer calls chaos love. She no longer mistakes anxiety for attraction. What used to spark her interest now triggers her discernment. That burning in her chest that once meant someone must be special now signals her to pause and ask if what she feels is real or just familiar pain dressed in flattery. She used to be drawn to the unavailable, the intense, the magnetic, because on some level she believed she had to earn love to keep it. But the woman who no longer needs validation has peeled back those patterns. She sees clearly now. She understands that chemistry born from trauma will always ask her to abandon herself for the sake of being desired. She no longer accepts passion that costs her peace. She knows now that a spark without substance burns fast and leaves nothing but ash. So when the energy is off, even if it's intoxicating, she breathes and lets it pass. She knows how to sit with longing without trying to fill it with someone else's chaos. She wants resonance now. She wants connection that feels like exhale, not performance. She wants conversation that nourishes, not tests. She wants touch that feels like safety, not proof. And that shift changes everything. It means she can walk away from what looks good but doesn't feel right. It means she can let go of the person who gives her butterflies but triggers her nervous system. It means she trusts the quiet knowing in her body more than the noise in her head. because she is no longer starving for recognition. She is no longer chasing validation disguised as romance. She is no longer trying to prove she is worthy of being chosen. She has already chosen herself, so she doesn't need someone to save her. She wants someone who meets her. She wants someone who knows their own shadow so they won't be afraid of hers. She wants someone who holds space, not control. And if that isn't present, she doesn't try to force it. She doesn't negotiate her intuition. She doesn't shrink her needs to keep the peace. She simply exits. And not because she is cold, but because she is clear. She no longer gets swept away by potential. She looks at the reality. She watches who someone becomes when they are no longer trying to impress her. She observes how she feels in their presence after the high wears off. She values the stillness between moments as much as the intensity within them, because depth is quiet, depth is steady, depth is not in the way someone looks at her but in the way they see themselves. So she lets go of the story that love must be dramatic to be real. She writes a new one where love is a place she returns to, not a war she must survive. And in doing so, she becomes immune to the games that once broke her. She becomes a woman who can feel the difference between what is meant for her and what is merely familiar. And that discernment is rare. That discernment is sacred. That discernment is what sets her free. She doesn't chase. She attracts from wholeness because she no longer needs to convince anyone of her worth. Carl Jung taught that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and that is exactly what she has done. She has sat with the parts of herself that once made her feel unlovable, and she has offered them compassion instead of exile. She has made peace with the cracks in her foundation and now builds from the inside out. Her validation is internal, and that inner solidity creates a gravity that cannot be manipulated. She doesn't send paragraphs trying to explain her value because her presence already explains it. She doesn't chase love because love that must be chased always runs. She doesn't audition for people who can't see her because she knows that real recognition doesn't need a performance. She no longer fears rejection because she understands that rejection is redirection from what is not aligned with her soul's integrity. The woman who no longer needs validation is magnetic, not because she withholds, but because she has nothing to prove. Her value is not up for negotiation. Her boundaries are not threats, they are standards. And those standards are not fueled by ego, but by self-respect. She became the one who chooses because she no longer places her self-worth in the hands of others. She listens more to her body than to the opinions of the crowd. She feels into what is true rather than reaching for what is popular. She does not apologize for her fullness. She does not shrink to soothe someone else's fragility. She does not dilute her light to keep others comfortable. And that kind of self-possession disrupts everything that relies on women being unsure. She attracts from wholeness, and that wholeness repels what is shallow. She is not impressed by breadcrumbs. She is not seduced by potential. She is not swayed by sweet words if they are not backed by solid actions. Her intuition speaks louder than charm. Her nervous system is her compass, and she trusts it. She no longer feels the need to chase because she knows that what is meant for her will never need to be pursued through self-abandonment. What is meant for her will recognize her. What is meant for her will resonate with the truth she carries. She attracts from wholeness because she has integrated her shadow and no longer acts from lack. She has become the type of woman who can hold love without grasping it, who can experience desire without losing herself in it. And because she does not seek to be completed, she only entertains what complements her. She does not chase because chasing implies lack, and she lives in abundance. She does not beg because begging is beneath someone who knows she is sacred. Her energy is clear, her heart is open, her soul is rooted, and that presence is undeniable. That presence makes others pause. That presence is what remains long after she leaves the room. Because she does not exist to be chosen, she exists to be known. And if someone cannot meet her there, she walks away with grace. Not to prove a point, not to punish, but to preserve her peace. And in doing so, she becomes unforgettable. Her boundaries are not walls, they are portals that mark the passage between chaos and peace. Carl Jung once said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and part of that privilege is knowing where you end and someone else begins. She has stopped confusing self-sacrifice with love, and she no longer equates being needed with being valued. Her boundaries are not armor to block the world, but sacred thresholds that protect what she has built through years of self-inquiry, heartbreak, and healing. She does not withhold affection, but she does not hand it out in hopes of being liked. She has learned that not every open hand deserves a seat at her table, and not every plea for closeness is a sign of love. She no longer overshares to feel seen or overgives to be kept. Jung taught that individuation is a journey toward wholeness, and her boundaries are a map of that journey. They do not shut others out, they call the right ones in. When someone approaches her life, they are not met with coldness, they are met with clarity. She does not need to raise her voice to assert her standards. Her energy already says, here is what I will allow and here is what I will not. And because she no longer fears being alone, she is no longer afraid to say no. She is not reactive, she is responsive. And that difference disorients those who are used to pushing past people's limits without consequence. She has turned her nervous system into a sanctuary, and she does not let just anyone disrupt its stillness. She used to flinch at the thought of being called difficult, but now she knows that being discerning is not cruelty, it is wisdom. She understands that relationships built on blurred lines eventually turn into battlegrounds, and she has no interest in reliving that. Her boundaries are alive. They are not fixed walls, they are intelligent filters, and what moves through them is chosen with care, not out of superiority, but out of reverence for what she has endured and become. She no longer lets chaos enter her life disguised as connection. She recognizes the difference between real intimacy and emotional intrusion. She does not leave the door open to prove she is kind. She holds it open only for those who arrive with integrity. This is not about being guarded, it is about being rooted. Her boundaries are the reflection of a woman who knows what it cost her to abandon herself in the past, and she will not pay that price again for anyone. She no longer trades her comfort for someone else's convenience. She no longer bends to avoid conflict if bending means betrayal. She lets people show who they are before she decides how close they get. She does not chase closure. She does not chase explanations. She lets people fall away when they hit the edge of her standards. She does not explain her boundaries to make others comfortable. She embodies them in silence. And that silence speaks. That stillness is not emptiness. It is power. Jung said that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. She has done that, and now she accepts nothing less. Her presence feels like safety because her boundaries are not made of stone, they are made of self-respect. She is not hiding, she is home, and only those who knock with reverence will ever know what that home feels like. She is no longer shaken by departure because she no longer ties her worth to who stays. Carl Jung taught that what you resist not only persists, but grows in power, and she has stopped resisting the reality that people leave. She does not clutch, she does not plead, she does not contort herself to stay needed. She has learned that the soul often redirects through removal, that the door that closes is sometimes the only mercy strong enough to reroute a life. So when someone exits, she does not take it as punishment, she takes it as guidance. She knows the ego will grieve, will flinch, will question, but she lets that pass like weather. Beneath it, her root system remains intact. She no longer needs people to stay in order to stay standing. When they go, she does not crumble, she recalibrates. Jung wrote that we meet ourselves time and again in 1,000 disguises on the path of life, and she understands now that every loss is another face of truth trying to bring her home. She does not fear abandonment because she does not abandon herself. She does not see solitude as failure because she does not equate togetherness with safety, and she does not call back what walked away on its own. She watches the leaving and lets it become what it is meant to become, whether memory or meaning or both. She does not force closure, she allows space, and in that space she hears her own voice more clearly. That voice no longer needs permission to feel peace. She no longer interprets silence as threat. She knows that not everyone is meant to walk beside her forever, and that some companions are only here to awaken what was asleep in her. When they have done their part, the path naturally diverges. She does not chase shadows, she walks forward with light. This does not mean she is numb, it means she is rooted, she has cried, she has broken, but she no longer breaks over those who could not hold her. She blesses what was. She does not revise it to feel safer. She does not villainize to feel stronger. She lets the truth remain whole and lets herself remain whole too. Jung believed that wholeness requires integrating the parts of ourselves that have been split off. She has done that. So when someone leaves, she does not fragment. She does not regress into the version of herself who thought she had to beg to be seen. She stays present. She breathes. And she continues. She no longer views rejection as evidence that something is wrong with her. She sees it as proof that something unaligned has ended, and endings to her are sacred. They clear the ground, they make room, they return her to herself, because in the quiet that follows someone's absence, she listens. And that listening births a new level of self-trust. Her inner world has grown so sturdy, so clear that no external exit can shake its foundation. She lets go without noise. She moves on without a stage. She does not need a witness to validate her peace. Her life continues not because she pretends she is unaffected, but because she knows healing is a spiral and she walks it with grace. Her detachment is not coldness, it is devotion to truth. And truth says, not everything meant something forever. Some things meant something for a moment, and that is enough. She no longer argues with distorted reflections. She understands now that people do not see her as she is, but as they are. Carl Jung taught that what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves we inevitably project onto others, and she has watched this play out in real time. She has seen calm mistaken for coldness, boundaries mistaken for arrogance, silence mistaken for weakness. She has been called difficult by those who benefited from her compliance, dramatic by those allergic to truth, ungrateful by those who counted her silence as consent. But she no longer wears their projections like labels. She no longer shrinks herself to make others feel more comfortable. She no longer performs agreeability just to be called good. She is not here to be digestible. She is not here to make others feel unthreatened by her evolution. She is not here to soften her voice to keep the peace when that peace requires her betrayal. Her understanding of projection has become a kind of psychic armor. It keeps her from absorbing venom that never belonged to her. It protects her from false stories trying to overwrite her own. She sees the unconscious wounds in others trying to dress her in blame, in shame, in labels that no longer fit, and she lets them, not because they are right, but because they are unhealed. She lets people misname her if they must. She lets them misunderstand her if they need to. She lets them walk away with their projections still intact, untouched, uncorrected, because she no longer chases clarity in broken mirrors. Her clarity comes from within. She has faced the parts of herself others pretend not to have. She has looked into the shadow and made peace with it. She has grieved the girl who used to twist herself into something lovable. She has buried the version of herself that once needed to be seen as good in every room. And from those ashes, a woman was born who does not need to be explained to be real. She does not need to be approved of to be whole. The more she has stepped into that inner authority, the more projections have arrived. They come like tests, like ghosts of an old life, asking her to prove she's changed. But she does not fight them. She does not explain. She does not seek to be understood by those who still refuse to understand themselves. She just continues, quietly, powerfully, rooted. And that rootedness creates a mystery that rattles the people who cannot touch her anymore. Her refusal to defend herself is not weakness. It is mastery. It is the kind of spiritual maturity that knows where her energy belongs. It is the kind of dignity that knows the truth does not tremble when it is misnamed. The woman who no longer argues with projection becomes untouchable in the most sacred way. She does not resist the shadow others throw her way. She simply refuses to wear it, and in doing so, she becomes the mirror that reflects people back to themselves. Not to harm, not to shame, but to awaken. That is why she is undeniable. Not because she convinces people of who she is, but because she no longer needs to. Her presence says it all. Her peace cannot be faked, and her silence at last speaks the loudest. She has learned to want without losing herself. Carl Jung taught that true individuation means becoming whole, not in fragments or through fusion with another, but by standing firmly in one's own center. And she does. She wants with an open hand, not a closed fist. She has loved deeply but not desperately. She has desired intimacy, but never as a substitute for identity. She no longer confuses merging with meaning. The ache for connection once felt like a hollowness, a place she asked others to fill. But now, her desire rises from a full cup. She knows that to love without attachment is not indifference, but the highest form of respect. It is not distance, but depth. She holds space for people to be who they are, not who she needs them to be. She listens without gripping. She gives without expecting return. She receives without building cages out of affection, because she knows that everything she seeks outside herself must first be made real within. Her self-respect cannot be negotiated. Her inner landscape cannot be bargained with. She has become fluent in solitude and does not fear the quiet that follows unmet expectations. Where others spiral into questions, she anchors into self-trust. Her poise is not coldness. It is the warmth of someone who has chosen not to abandon herself again. The woman who understands desire without attachment knows how to welcome without absorbing, how to invite without losing her edges, how to be soft without becoming shapeless. She loves with the kind of grace that says, I want you, not I need you. That distinction changes everything, because when someone is not your oxygen, they are not your prison. When someone is not your mirror, they are not your measure. She is not afraid of being left because she never leaves herself, and that unwavering loyalty to her own becoming creates a kind of gravitational pull that cannot be faked. People feel it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. She is the woman whose love does not ask for proof, but presence, whose devotion does not bend into compliance, whose intimacy does not come from fear, but freedom. And in a world conditioned to conflate love with possession, her way of relating feels like a revolution. She has made peace with impermanence. She knows that even the most beautiful connections may end, but their ending does not mean she was unworthy. It means the story needed to turn. And so she lets go without bitterness. She releases without revenge. She trusts the unfolding. Her love becomes a blessing that does not demand to be returned in the same form. She can walk away from someone she loves if it means walking back to herself. She does not idolize potential. She does not wait to be chosen. She chooses herself again and again, and from that place of inner alignment, she becomes capable of holding space for real connection without losing her center. Her dignity is not performative. It is embodied. Her calm is not silence. It is knowing. And the more she trusts in what flows to her freely, the less she needs to chase what was never meant to stay. She knows now that the most magnetic energy is not the one that grasps, but the one that rests, not the one that clings, but the one that invites. Her desire is holy because it is clean, it is clear, it is courageous, and in its purity it becomes unforgettable. She used to take rejection as a verdict, as evidence that something in her needed fixing or softening or shrinking, but now she sees it as a mirror, and Carl Jung's teachings whisper through that reflection. Rejection reveals what no longer aligns. It is not a wound, but a cleansing. It is not a dismissal, but a signpost pointing to wholeness. Jung taught that the path to individuation is not paved with approval, but with honest confrontation of the self, and she has confronted herself in every season. She has sat in the stillness after someone left and asked deeper questions than, why me? She asked, what am I being shown? She no longer begs for closure. She becomes it. When someone drifts away because she no longer dances for validation or molds herself into their comfort zone, she lets them go with grace. Because she knows she was never meant to shrink to fit a version of herself they could understand. She is not angry, she is not bitter, she is clear. Rejection has become one of her sharpest tools for refinement. It has chiseled her into clarity. It has stripped away what was false, leaving only what is rooted. She does not personalize someone's discomfort with her power. She does not translate someone's silence into her own inadequacy. Instead, she sees each goodbye as a punctuation mark in her ongoing story, a necessary pause that signals progress. Every time someone cannot meet her where she stands, it only confirms that she is no longer standing in the same place she used to beg from. That evolution is not accidental. It is the result of deep inner work. It is the fruit of her shadow confrontations, her solitude, her decision to love without attachment, and her refusal to water herself down just to be tolerated. She knows that sometimes people leave because the version of her they could control no longer exists, and instead of mourning that, she honors it. Because if being liked means being less, she chooses to be misunderstood. If staying connected means abandoning her center, she chooses to stand alone. She understands now that rejection does not mean she is too much. It means she has outgrown the environment where she was once asked to be less. Carl Jung spoke of the importance of integrating the self, and she lives that truth now. Rejection is not failure, it is filtration. It filters out what no longer resonates with her frequency. It removes what cannot support her next chapter. And because she has stopped chasing roles that require self-erasure, she no longer fears being unwanted. She has become so anchored in her own essence that when someone exits, she simply nods. She doesn't close her heart, but she doesn't reopen the door either. She knows that true connection does not require her to fracture, so she stays whole, even when someone cannot hold her. That level of detachment is not coldness, it is mastery. She has mastered the art of remaining open without being emptied, of remaining warm without being burned. When people walk away, she thanks them quietly, because their absence makes space for her next alignment. In the past, she would have begged them to stay. Now, she lets the silence do the sorting. And in that silence, she hears something sacred, the sound of herself expanding into who she was always meant to be. She used to interpret silence as punishment and solitude as proof of her inadequacy, but that was before she understood what Carl Jung meant by individuation. It was before she realized that the journey inward is the only one that can ever truly anchor a person. She no longer flinches at her own company. Empty rooms no longer echo shame or lack. They hum with presence, with peace, with the unshakable fullness of someone who has finally met herself. Where once she would have rushed to fill space with distractions, conversations, or borrowed identities, she now savors the quiet. Because in that quiet, she uncovered what no relationship, no title, no external validation ever could have handed her. She discovered the self, not the persona she curated for others, but the raw, essential core beneath all the masks. Jung taught that wholeness is not found in being everything to someone else, but in becoming all of who you are to yourself. That is what she chose, and in that choosing, she no longer feels abandoned when others leave. She no longer fears unanswered texts because she does not disappear in someone else's silence. She does not crumble when a room holds only her. Instead, she blooms in it. She makes tea without urgency. She walks without performance. She rests without explanation. Her solitude is no longer lonely. It is sacred. It is the space where her intuition grew louder than her insecurity, where her values became clearer than her cravings, where her reflection became more familiar than any validation a man could give her. She used to ache for someone to see her. Now she sees herself. She used to twist herself into what would be chosen. Now she chooses herself daily and gently, lets go of anything that cannot meet her at that depth. She is not closed off. She is simply no longer willing to betray herself to avoid being alone. The irony is that this very self-possession makes her more magnetic than ever, but she no longer needs to be desired to feel valuable. She does not need attention to feel alive. She does not need a +1 to feel complete. She is not waiting for someone to pick her. She is busy living, creating, and becoming. There is no panic in her now, only presence. There is no need to perform, only the quiet grace of being rooted in her truth. She has learned that some seasons are meant for deep companionship with the soul, and that those are often the most transformational. Solitude showed her what codependency tried to silence. It showed her that her power was never in being someone's everything. It was in being fully herself, with or without applause. Jung's shadow work taught her to hold space for her grief, her longing, her desire, and her joy without needing to outsource any of it. So now she sits with herself the way she used to beg others to sit with her. She keeps her own company the way she once wished someone would, and it has made her whole. When someone tries to enter her life now, they do not meet an empty woman waiting to be filled. They meet someone so anchored in her essence that anything less than truth falls away on contact. She no longer fears being alone because she finally met the one person who will never leave her, the self she was always meant to become. When she walks away, it is not in anger, but in reverence for the journey she survived to stand upright again. It is not with cruelty, but with the kind of grace that only comes from having finally seen herself clearly in the mirror of someone's disregard. Carl Jung spoke of individuation as the process of becoming whole, and she learned that wholeness sometimes requires leaving the table where your hunger is misunderstood. She used to linger where she wasn't chosen, shrink where she wasn't safe, and perform for scraps of attention that mimicked love but never nourished her. But something ancient in her finally stirred awake. Not rage, not vengeance, but clarity, the kind that floods a room when you stop explaining yourself and simply gather your things. She no longer chases closure from those who benefit from her confusion. She no longer negotiates her worth with people who only understand value through absence. When she walks away, it is not to provoke guilt, it is to protect peace. Because she now understands that not all departures are endings, some are awakenings, and her footsteps out of the room often echo louder than anything she said while she was still trying to be understood. The woman who no longer needs validation, no longer fears distance. She knows that space is sacred, that silence speaks, that leaving is not weakness, it is wisdom. She used to believe that staying proved her love. Now she understands that sometimes leaving is the most loving thing she can do for herself. Her absence is not an invitation for pursuit. It is a benediction, a quiet closing of the door, a final act of self-respect performed not with bitterness but with the gentleness of someone who finally remembered her own name. She does not slam the door. She does not throw accusations. She simply vanishes with the kind of dignity that lingers long after she is gone. Because she knows now that those who mishandle the sacred do not deserve a second chance to fumble it. She does not need them to feel her loss. She does not need their remorse. She does not wait for apologies from people who mistook her kindness for compliance. She walks without flinching because the version of her that would have stayed no longer exists. She has become someone new, someone who doesn't just survive the storm, but recognizes when she is standing in one she no longer needs to weather. Jung once said that loneliness does not come from having no people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that matter most. She left because she was tired of speaking her soul into a void, tired of repeating herself to ears that only heard what made them comfortable, tired of proving what was never up for debate. So when she walks away, it is not an act of punishment, it is an act of liberation. Her presence was the gift, her silence is the boundary, her exit is not a failure, it is the final lesson. A woman who has returned to herself will not be pried from her peace, and those who lose her will spend a lifetime learning what her stillness tried to teach them.